Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the first formal press conference of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. We're scheduled to go for about an hour. We don't want to run any longer than that because the board has other business to take care of. And the way we'll proceed is, first of all, we'll hear from the board, and then we will take questions here in Houston before going around to other NASA centers, and then coming back for follow-up questions here in Houston. So that's the order we'll go in. I'd like to introduce Admiral Hal Gaiman in the center there, who is U.S. Navy retired admiral and chairman of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, and we'll start off with a few words from Admiral Gaiman.
Good afternoon. What I would like to do is introduce the members of the board to you. I'd like to make a few opening comments and tell you what we're doing and how we're organized in outline form, and then we'll go to the questions. So start off with the introductions. Starting on my left is Major General John Barry from the Air Force Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. John had previously served and worked on the Challenger mishap investigation. Next to John is Dr. Jim Halleck from the Department of Transportation. Jim is the Chief of Aviation Safety Division at the Volpe Center. He has appeared as expert witnesses for the NTSB and the FAA in countless accident investigations. Next to him is Steve Wallace from the Federal Aviation Agency. Steve, who is both a lawyer and a pilot, so that balances out, has had a 27-year career with the FAA. In the last 3 years, he has been the director of the FAA Office of Accident Investigation. And last, down on the end, is Rear Admiral Steve Turcotte, the commander of the Naval Safety Center. And as the head of the Naval Safety Center, Steve is responsible for the investigation and the evaluation of every aviation mishap in the Navy and the Marine Corps, as well as a lot of other mishaps. Seated to my right is Mr. Roger Tetrault from industry, retired. Roger is just being brought on board as a board member as we speak. He has a background as a leader of industry in the area of designing, manufacturing, operating, and the safety of heavy nuclear systems. So he knows preciseness and precision when he sees it. Beside Roger is Major General Ken Hess. He is the U.S. Air Force Chief of Safety and the commander of the Air Force Safety Center. And similar to Admiral Turcotte, as the head of Air Force Safety, he is responsible for the final evaluation, findings of and causes and recommendations for every major flight and other mishaps in the U.S. Air Force. Beside him is Scott Hubbard. He is the director of the NASA Ames Research Center. Mr. Hubbard is the only voting member of the board who has an association with NASA. Mr. Hubbard, Scott has recently just finished his analysis and evaluation of the Lost Mars program and is used to investigating mishaps of this type. Beside him is Major General Dwayne Deal of the Air Force Space Command. General Deal has served as a member or as the chief of aircraft and missile mishaps, including being the president of a mishap board for a Delta II space launch accident that happened in 1997. Finally, on the end is Mr. Astronaut Brian O'Connor, the NASA Associate Administrator for Safety and Mission Assurance. Brian is a ex officio member of the board. He's not a voting member of the board. I like to refer to Brian O'Connor as the one member of the board who knows what he's talking about. He is an astronaut and a veteran of several shuttle missions himself and has been of great help to us. So he's a non-voting member of the board. That's the board. Extraordinarily rich and deep board in accident and investigations and aircraft matters. Among them, they have been either the chief investigator or an investigator on essentially every major aircraft mishap in the United States, probably for the last couple of years. They are qualified, each of them is qualified to be the chairman of this board because of their backgrounds. They are probably the most senior and the most talented aviation mishap individuals in the United States of America. They got that way because of years and years of hard work, independence, and integrity, and I can assure you that nobody is going to put that reputation on the line at this stage and allow themselves to be influenced by any outside influences. What we have done is taken what I would call supervisory control over the investigation of this incident. We are now doing such things as the board is now controlling all the release of material. This is material, for example, that needs to be sent back for refurbishment, material that didn't have anything to do with the incident, but was impounded. We are now the authority for the release of material to either be moved or resume its disassembly and refurbishment for the next time it's used. The MRT, the Mishap Response Team, which is the management of all of the working groups, is now reporting to us. The most famous two working groups would be the Debris Collection Working Group and the Data Reduction Working Groups. They're the ones that are making most of the news. We're now receiving daily reports and approving what they do. We have established an independent analysis team. I would refer to this little chart over here, and you'll see a little box alongside us over there. We have the beginnings of a team of independent experts that have nothing to do with NASA. The function of that independent analysis team would be to advise the board on those elements, those engineering, scientific, detailed elements, which in their opinion, in order for our conclusions in our report to hang together and stand on a solid base, ought to be independently verified by a laboratory or a university or some agency other than NASA. It's not that we don't believe the NASA data. It's just that in order that the report be truly independent and that the conclusions be based on good, solid analytical work, both inside NASA and outside NASA, this team will advise us on when we come across one of those junctures in the road. They will also write the statement of work. They will also liaison with whatever laboratory or university it is that's doing the independent analysis. We have the first few members of that team on board already, but we've just started that. We are located not at the Johnson Space Center, as you probably are aware. We're rented. We are in a building off-site. We're beginning to accumulate our own staff. We have instituted a formal process by which we task NASA for witnesses, data, conclusions, whatever. And you can see also on that little chart over there this thing called the task force, I think it's called, the task force. That's a NASA entity that maintains document control over our taskings and the replies, so we don't duplicate the tasking, and that when we ask for something, we only ask once, and that we can find, catalog, and library all of the actions that we've taken. That's ongoing. The board has also organized itself into 3 sub-boards. Very, very loosely, the boards might be broken down as follows. The first board is what I would call a material and management kind of a board. This sub-board is going to look at such things as refurbishment of the shuttle between flights, manufacturing, test and evaluation processes, things having to do with the material end of the process, quality control, things like that, as well as how the boards and committees and safety functions work, whether or not interdepartmental boards which were supposed to share information, whether or not they really did, and all that sort of stuff. The second sub-board, which we have broken ourselves into, could loosely be called operations. This has to do with flight crew operations, crew performance, training, certification, safety procedures, planning, the execution of the mission itself, all those kinds of performance kinds of factors. And then the third team, the third sub-board, could loosely be called technical and engineering evaluation. This is the board which is going to pour very carefully into the telemetry data, what conclusions are drawn from the telemetry data, what we learn from the debris, what tests the debris should be subjected to, the technical analysis of that, and what we can learn from the technical analysis, and tell us what we should require. There are 2 or 3 board members. Each of these sub-boards has either 2 or 3 board members. We are interested in expanding this board. There's a ton of work to be done. We have a very, very rich and deep experience on this board in investigatory matters, aviation safety, and mishap investigation. But there are other areas of science, engineering, and physics that we either will hire experts to help us, or maybe even include elevating them to the point of having an additional board member, like we did with Mr. Tetrault. So this next time we come, there may be 11 of us or 10 of us or something like that. For future press conferences, so that we don't tie up the whole board, and we will hold periodic press conferences, I'm thinking weekly, but whatever it takes, I mean, whatever it takes to get a good release of information. My intent would be that I would make myself available, and then I would have one of these boards come with me. And then we can discuss processes and discuss where the investigation's going, and if we've learned anything or something like that in the area that the board is working, and we'll rotate our way right through all the boards so you can get in as much detail as you want. So what I would ask you to take away from that comment is that there's only one investigation going on. It's our investigation. There are thousands of NASA engineers and scientists and technicians who are poring over data and poring over processes right now. They're all in working groups. They're all still working just as hard as they were as if we weren't here. But we have placed ourselves over top of that investigation, and we will be availing ourselves of all the data and all that work. For this week, in the near term, the board is going to finish up here in Houston tonight. Tomorrow we're going to go to Kennedy Space Center and spend a couple days. We're going to go to Marshall Space Flight Center and spend a couple days. And we'll be back into Michoud also, and we'll be back here on Saturday night. And Sunday is a working day for us, and we will continue in Houston then for the next foreseeable future. We think that it's very important for our understanding of what technical people tell us, that we have a personal relationship with the hardware, a personal relationship with the equipment, that we actually have seen and touched and understand what it is they're talking about. So it does take a little time for us to run down to Kennedy, but it's worth it in our examination. And at the same time, of course, we'll be looking at various things that we need to. The board is interested in establishing, and not only are we established off of the JSC now, but we're also interested in establishing an independent way for people to communicate with us. So in the very near future, we're going to establish our own website, just like NASA has their website. We'll establish our own address, which we will publish, and people who would like to communicate directly with the board, not via NASA, will be able to do so. And we think that's very important. A couple of recent developments, and then I'll close and we'll take some questions. The debris collection continues, centered over East Texas and western Louisiana. There's no change to that. I would report to you that based on my reports that I received this morning, we still do not have a single piece of confirmed shuttle debris west of Fort Worth. There are many very, very interesting reports of sightings at which the MIT is running down. We continue to look at some very interesting reports. I believe that the statistics are right now, we've run down 105 of the 179 credible reports of debris west of Fort Worth, and we have yet to find a single confirmed piece of shuttle debris west of Fort Worth. The number of pieces of debris at Barksdale Air Force Base is passing 1,600. The rate of delivery now is 2 or 3 truckloads a day, and the very first truckload of debris headed toward Kennedy has been dispatched, and the process of reconstruction at Kennedy then will begin. The search continues. We are very grateful to the many, many agencies that have and individuals that are helping us with this. All of the law enforcement agencies, FEMA, National Guard, the various Texas and Louisiana agencies, Forest Service. I can't name them all, but this really would not be possible without the dedicated and unselfish work of all those people who don't get a lot of publicity, particularly the last couple of days when it's been cold and raining out there. They really have done a wonderful job. We're now up in the thousands of pieces that have been collected, and they're being very careful about it. And we as a board, and I know that NASA is also, would like to express our appreciation for all the people that are doing that. Let's see, 2 working groups. The many working groups continue at full speed. We have made ourselves aware of what they're doing, and as our investigation gets deeper, we will begin to interact personally and in great detail with each of the working groups. But the many working groups, like the external tank working group, the reentry working group, et cetera, they're all working very hard and meticulously, and we've become aware of what they're doing. One of the things that we're working on very hard that will be made available to you in the not too distant future is the use of all of the photography that civilians and personal private individuals have provided us. Photography in the form of stills and photography in the form of video loops. What we're doing is building a great mosaic in which we are actually not superimposing, but we are combining various video products that we can ascertain the exact timeline of what the video product is, along with the telemetry data and the radar observations into a fairly sophisticated audio, visual, and telemetry reconstruction from the time the orbiter Columbia crossed the coast until we lost signal. That process is going on right now. It's very meticulous. The photography is from private individuals has been very helpful. And if there is more out there from either government agencies, what do you call those telescopes that peer into the sky? Anything, it has been extraordinarily helpful to build this, what we hope will be essentially a stereoscopic mosaic of the shuttle as it came across the sky. Remembering it was dark when it came across California, but the pieces that we have so far have added to our understanding of what happened, and we have a lot more work to do. We're just beginning on this, but it seems to be promising. I think the last thing on my list here is to say that we are going to release, after this press conference is over, the audio loop in Mission Control. You can listen to it and draw your own conclusions. And in it, you will hear the various control stations report the things that have already been reported to you, but you'll hear the voice report as they report loss of signal and report their various anomalies. So that will be available after this press conference is over, and you can use it as you see fit. Let me see. I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. And with that, I would say that that's all of my prepared remarks. And Steve, if you want to recognize the first questioner, we will begin.
All right, we'll take questions first here in Houston, and then we'll go around to the other centers. And Marcia Dunn, AP. And by the way, if when I call on you, if you'll state your name and affiliation when the microphone comes to you.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press, for either the Admiral or you can delegate. What needs to be done regarding testing of insulation foam, fragile thermal tiles? How will you be conducting impact tests, velocity tests? Where might that take place, and will you be directly involved in that?
We as a board are not going to comment at this time on any particular cause or favorite theory or hypothesis or anything like that, other than to say that that all of that kind of testing is going to happen. And as I indicated before, if our independent analysis team thinks it needs to be duplicated or verified by an independent panel, we will avail ourselves of that also. So I'm not going to comment on any particular piece of equipment or whether or not any particular piece of debris or anything like that is more promising or more important than any other at this stage.
Bill?
Bill Harwood with CBS News. A kind of a philosophical question, if you will. We've gone from these daily briefings from last week when things were hot and heavy, and now we're going to transition, obviously, over to you guys controlling the dissemination of information on a more relaxed basis, I guess, once a week or whatever. I'm trying to get a sense of what kind of products will be released to us as the investigation goes on. Obviously, the audio loop will be very helpful. Ron Dittemore was talking about a telemetry timeline and an overlay of the ground track that he was trying to get together. Don't know the status of that, but just philosophically, how do you view, the willingness of the board to release technical data, understanding you're not going to draw conclusions until you're done, but just letting us in on some of the stuff you see as you see it? I don't know if it's clear or not.
When I said that the board would be available weekly, I did not mean to imply that that's the only time we're going to release information. We will, first of all, NASA can continue to release information. Certainly statistics like how much debris has been picked up, and when we find an interesting part, we'll tell you right away. I mean, if we find something substantial, that'll be released right away. What I meant to say is that the access to the board for where we are and what we're doing and would be available on a weekly basis. But we will continue to release. We will have a press availability daily if that's what you want. But you just won't be members of the board. We'll be all over the country doing things. But as far as information coming out, it'll be just like we did before. It'll be on a continuous basis.
Okay, Bob.
Bob Hager from NBC News. It's been, our last technical briefing was on Friday, and you ran over some of the summary information, but I just wonder if there's anything else we've missed, if there's any other important new factual information, raw data that you have now that we don't know about yet.
Right. As of this time, there's no significant facts or details that I'm aware of. For example, the building of this stereoscopic visual representation of the flight is going to take a lot of work. Most of these videotapes from private individuals don't have very good reference points in them and things like that. So you got to be really careful what you're looking at. The timeline that Mr. Dittemore is working on, that continues to be refined, and when it is, it'll be released. Whenever it's available, it'll be released. I'm not aware of any particular panel, if you want to. I'm not aware of any particular new breaking kind of a thing. That's kind of why we're releasing the audio loop. That's now available, and I'm not aware of any particular news. As I say, when we find major pieces of the shuttle, that would be released as it occurs.
Okay. Kathy, and then we'll start moving down that way.
Collier, The Washington Post, and this is a Washington-type question. No surprise. As you know, members of Congress and other critics have been pressing for you to not be a panel that was picked by NASA and reports to NASA, but to report to the President or somebody else. Is that resolved in your mind at this point? And if not, could you address your philosophy and your thinking on that?
The existence of this board is a direct result of the recommendations made after the Challenger accident. The implementation of the recommendations from the Challenger accident were approved by the President. So as soon as this incident occurred, they got the procedures off the shelf, and we had our first meeting by teleconference at 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. The administrator of NASA signed the letter creating this board, but and his street address will be on the envelope of the outside of the report. But this board is fully aware that we have many constituents. We are fully aware that the families of the deceased astronauts are our constituents. We are aware that the Congress of the United States is one of our constituents. The White House, the taxpayers and citizens of this country are all constituents of this board, and we feel an obligation to all of them for a full disclosure. I mean, our report will be addressed to the administrator of NASA, but it will be a public document, and I am not at least bit concerned, and I think I can speak for my fellow board members, that we are not the least bit concerned about how the various branches of government in Washington work out who's going to review whose work or anything like that, because ours is going to be a deep and thorough investigation. We're going to attempt to find the causes and make recommendations, and we're not concerned about who reports to whom in this matter. And we don't see that it has any process relevance to what we do. We're going to work just as hard, just as fast, put just as many days in. We're going to get just as much cooperation from everybody involved, no matter who signed our charter. So it's a legitimate question of public policy, but it doesn't have any bearing on how we do our work. And I have already communicated with several members of Congress, some of the oversight committees myself, not via the administrator of NASA, and let them know how I feel about that. So there's no problem on our end of this matter. And that's a long answer to a question. I hope it's helpful.
Okay, right here, and then we'll come back.
Haven Daily, News 24 Houston. Obviously, this is a very difficult investigation. Originally, you were given 60 days. We know that you can ask for more time if you need it. But given the complexity of this investigation, do you think that 60-day time period is realistic to come up with any kind of conclusions?
The 60 days comes right out of this manual that they pulled off the wall to charter us. We are driven by two imperatives. The first imperative is to get it right for a number of reasons, including the safety of follow-on shuttle crews, not to mention the program and the continuation of the program. That imperative drives us to take our time and be very meticulous. We have another imperative, which is the welfare of the 3 astronauts who are on orbit right now, who depend upon the shuttle system, at least for their transportation, if not for their supplies. In that sense, we have an imperative to move along as rapidly as we possibly can. The members of my board who are in the professional aviation accident investigation world, either civilian or military, both are used to the process where in the process of an accident investigation, if you find something that has something to do with the safety or airworthiness of the craft you're talking about, you release that advisory right away. And so we haven't decided this ourselves, but we have kind of concluded that we can satisfy these two imperatives in our own processes. With this, we think we can get at the business of timeliness as well as completeness. And this is just something for us to handle. I'll ask Scott, for example, the FAA Chief of Aviation Safety, whether or not this is a procedure which is reasonable.
Steve.
Steve. Yeah, sorry.
Mic on?
You're on.
Well, yes, absolutely. As I could refer to a couple of recent major civil aviation accidents where, in our case, we operate 32,000 airline flights per day in this country, and the continued safety of all those flights is the #1 responsibility of the FAA. So, for example, after the most recent air carrier accident, which was the Beech 1900 in Charlotte, we issued a directive requiring an inspection of all of the elevator control systems of that fleet, further procedures to validate the weight and balance procedures. So it's very common for us to issue a directive on any safety issue identified well before the NTSB makes its finding of probable cause. Here we don't have the same exact imperative of the operational fleet running 30,000 flights a day, but at the same time, we're not constrained at all to wait until we have made a probable cause finding to issue any safety recommendations or changes.
Thank you.
With ABC News, you keep mentioning that you found no debris west of Fort Worth at this point. Is there a growing realization that, in fact, there may be no debris west of Fort Worth? And is there a sense that you may never find what may have been the first pieces of the shuttle to come apart?
No, we're nowhere near that yet. We have reason to believe, we don't have proof, but we have reason to believe that we should keep looking west of Fort Worth. The difficulty is that as we reconstruct this accident in greater detail, and this reconstruction will be ongoing, so I don't have anything to tell you about our reconstruction that you don't already know. But the more data, the more pictures we get, the more videos we get, the more we examine the engineering data, the more we realize when this incident started. And so if there are credible possibilities west of Fort Worth, we're going to energetically pursue them because it's possible that there's something out there. It's possible. So we're not giving up on that. The second way I would respond to your question is that there's a lot of empty space west of Fort Worth, and what we are attempting to do now, I shouldn't say we're attempting to do now. What NASA has been attempting to do since day one is to be more predictive as to where we should look for the debris. We're trying to find radar tapes from Nellis Air Force Base. We're looking every place to see whether or not any unusual radar returns. We're calling in many outside NASA, and we have outside people now to look at the predictive analysis of where the debris might have landed. Heavy things travel faster. Light things, some people say light things might go farther because once you're above the jet stream and you come down through the jet stream, you might go farther. You would think that heavy things would be further east and light things would be west, but it turns out we're finding very, very light things all the way over in Louisiana. So we're trying to be more predictive about where we look because there's not many witnesses in the area between California and the Fort Worth area. So no, we haven't concluded anything like there's nothing out there worth looking at. Absolutely not.
Okay, we'll take that one right there, and then we'll come down here to Mark.
Mike Cabbage with the Orlando Sentinel. Could you go into a bit of detail about the other NASA assets listed on the flow chart that flow directly to the task force and don't come from the working groups through the MRT?
Yes. The MRT has a structure on it that's related to this mishap, but all of NASA is at our disposal, not just people related to this mishap. That refers to like corporate NASA, including headquarters. So when we start looking at safety programs, management issues, manning and personnel, I mean, all of those contributing kinds of things, we may get ourselves beyond the purview of the MRT, which has essentially mishap, very, very strict mishap related kinds of activities.
Okay, we'll get to Mark, and then we'll...
Mark Carreau from the Houston Chronicle. I want to go back to statements at the end of your opening remarks when you're talking about the videography you're collecting. There's some awfully intriguing stuff that's already in the public arena. One, the Air Force photo that some, I think, are interpreting as not jagged edge, but perhaps premature deployment of landing gear. There's some images of the shuttle at breakup that show the tips of both the left and the right wings off. What is this telling you? It is already public, but maybe not collected under one umbrella. Is this important stuff? Is there a theory that you're working that involves any of this?
It's important that we get as much of this videography as we possibly can, because in a lot of cases what we're really looking at is the ionization. We're looking at the heat and flame, and we're not really looking at the shuttle at all. And so usually it takes considerable amount of work to see what you're really, to be sure of what you're seeing. Particularly in the early stages when the shuttle was extraordinarily high and it was dark. On that side of the United States it was dark. You're really looking at a bright light. And other than to say that this is an area of fruitful investigation, I'm not going to comment on whether we have a favorite theory or anything like that right now. We don't have favorite theories. We're pursuing everything. We're pursuing everything. I mean, even if we were to find what piece of debris fell off first, we still have to find the cause of it, and then we have to find the contributing cause of it. So it would certainly help us, but we have a lot of work to do, even if we were able to determine which tile came off first. To us, that's a lead, but we have to go much deeper than that.
Okay. This gentleman right here.
Jeremy Meunier with the Chicago Tribune. What kind of subpoena power or power to get documents, et cetera, will you have if you need that, if you have to compel people to give testimony, that sort of thing?
We have all the authority we need over both NASA and its contractors. And as you know, NASA is largely contracted. We have been advised by counsel that we have all the authority we need to do this. Now, keep in mind that we are conducting this inquiry along the lines of a safety mishap investigation, which means that witnesses may be privileged. In other words, we may give witnesses privileged status in which their statements would be non-attributed. In other cases, we'll have sworn testimony and verbatim testimony, but the procedures of a safety investigation are such that we want to find the causes of this, not the guilty parties. As a matter of fact, if you look at our charter, we are specifically excluded from assigning responsibility or culpability. We are not looking for that. This is a safety investigation.
Okay, we'll do Nancy, and then we'll go around to some of the other NASA centers before coming back here to pick up some of the others.
Nancy Holland, KHOU-TV. One of the credentials that you bring to this is the investigation of the coal, and yet that would seem to be a very different kind of situation. What do the two perhaps have in common that I'm not saying that might help you with this investigation?
It is very different in detail. In one area, it's very similar. In the case of the investigation that General Crouch and I were the co-chairman of the Coal Commission, we did not investigate what the crew of the coal did, and we did not investigate what happened to the coal. We were investigating essentially everyone above the coal, all of the Navy, the Unified Commanders, the JCS, the DIA. I mean, We were investigating whether or not the larger bureaucracies, the larger organizations had done everything that they were supposed to do to allow the coal to have a safe port visit. The similarity is, there's a similarity here in that part of our review will be a review of the larger organization to see whether or not they are managing a prudent and safe program. The difference is that we are tasked to find out what happened here, and that's the difference between the coals. So in the sense that I'm used to how bureaucracies work and the way I like to describe it is individuals don't need to worry about anything that this board is going to find. We aren't out to find any guilty people or find any negligence or culpability. But if you have a secretary and a potted plant outside your office, then you're fair game.
Okay, we'll start now. We're going to go to questions at Kennedy Space Center, and I'd like to say that because of the time situation, we'll probably not get to do all the questions at all the centers, but we're going to go ahead and take a few from KSC at this time.
Admiral, this is Jim Banky of Space.com. Based on the data, the information you've seen, the pieces of debris that you've seen, and maybe any of the board members could chime in, at this point, can you say that you're fairly confident you will be able to find a cause of this accident and get flying again? Is there enough out there so that you won't come up with an unexplained anomaly as the cause of this disaster?
I'm going to let the Chief of Air Force Safety and the Chief of Navy Safety make a comment upon their experience in getting to the bottom of accidents in which there have been less data than we have here. Ken?
I think your question is a very pertinent one to the board because of the wealth of information that's going to be out there for us to go and sift through and try to decide in a manner that will give us some conclusions. We have, in our experience in the Air Force, many times accounted what we most likely think may have happened, but you can never prove it with all certainty. And so we're going to likely get ourselves into areas of probable causes in any number of areas here in this particular mishap. Our charter is to try to find the cause, and to the extent that we can drill down and ask enough questions of why, we're going to attempt to do that. But it is a probable outcome that we may not find the exact cause of this mishap. But we will have to let the information speak for itself on the course of the investigation.
Admiral Turcotte, you want to add?
I'd like to add a couple things. You know, first off, in any investigation, you go in and the very first thing you do is assume, make no assumptions. You make no judgments, and you suspect everything. So having said that, part of our task, if we do get to the point where we have not exactly found the mishap, we will have covered everything else. We will have looked at those positives. Was it this? Was it that? We'll have looked at those obvious things that people are looking at right now that saying could not be a cause. So we will narrow the focus, if that gives you a better example. Looking at the complexity of this, it is huge. It is one of the biggest debris fields that I think any of us had ever seen. The complexity of the science and technology that goes into it is huge. But getting back to your original question, we're going to look at everything, and we're going to narrow it down to the most probable cause, if not the cause.
Go ahead. Yes, I'd like to. I'm going to recognize General Barry here a second, then we'll get to the next question.
One of the things that people have asked before is there a black box on the Challenger, and there wasn't, and on the Columbia there isn't. What those great space machines have been able to do is they have tremendous sensors on them. So right now I think there's on the order of 4,000 sensors that we're going to be able to take advantage of and help piece that together. So that's very unique.
Now, Seth Borenstein from Knight Ridder Newspapers. Admiral Gaiman, have you already tasked anything to the independent analysis team that you were talking about to redo analysis, and has that included the foam or anything to do with orbital debris?
As of today, no, we have not tasked any independent analysis at this time. That's an ongoing issue as the investigation begins to form some avenues that as we begin to point in a certain direction or to key on certain causes, that's when we are going to independently verify the foundations that lead us down that road. We are not interested in independently verifying everything that NASA does. No, we're going to wait until we have matters that the board thinks bears directly on our conclusions.
This is Phil, Channel Earth News. Admiral, can you provide us a fishbone chart of all the possibilities you're looking at? I realize it must be in the hundreds, if not thousands, but I just want to try to get an order of magnitude so we don't have any pet theories or the favorite theory of the day items. And obviously, I guess you realize by now, because of the high interest in manned space flight and all the reporters, yes, we would like to have daily briefings, or at least briefings as often as practical.
We're quite aware of the NASA fault tree system. We've been briefed on it. We understand how it works. We think it's a great investigatory tool. We have developed, we haven't developed our own fault tree, but when we organized ourselves into these boards, we felt like all possibilities or all fruitful areas would be included in one of these boards. So if that answers your question, whether or not we've written down a list of all the possible causes. We haven't done that. We haven't sat down and written down a list of all possible causes. But we are fully aware that NASA has a process for that, and we're watching over that. We're an overlook of that process.
Admiral, this is Brad Liston from Reuters. Just to follow up on that. Do I understand correctly then the fault tree analysis that was underway at JSC is still underway, but it's not a tool that your board is planning to use?
The fault tree analysis process is still underway, and we are going to overwatch that process. We're not going to direct it. We're not going to make them do anything that they aren't already doing. It's their independent way of eliminating every possibility. But as our investigation begins to bore down, when we find a branch or a twig on the fault tree which they have closed out, we may reopen it. We may cause them to come back and explain to us why they eliminated that. If we're happy with that explanation, that'll be the end of it. If we think that requires independent verification, we'll go out and get independent verification of it. And if we want it reopened and we want more work done, then they will reopen it. But this will be a process as the board bores down vertically into different subject matters in accordance with this sub-board arrangement that I indicated. We will be in overwatch of the fault tree process. They are not doing kind of a mother may I kind of a process with us, nor do we want it that way. It kind of gets back to the question of press conferences. We are going to drive an investigation ourselves using all of the resources of NASA and independent experts as we see fit. We don't want to be on the receiving end of a tidal wave of unrelated data that we couldn't possibly digest. So the process we're going to use is we're going to drive it down and then avail ourselves of the work that NASA has done and then independently verify anything that we feel needs to be independently verified.
Stefano Coledan for Popular Mechanics. Admiral, I have a question that I was wondering, if you get a sharper picture of the shuttle re-entering, like via the Air Force corrective optic?
I'm going to have to just take that question right now, whether or not there is a better image than that fuzzy Air Force picture. I have not seen one myself. I've seen images, lots of images, but Whether or not there is one, I don't know. We'll just have to take that question and get. I don't want to say something that turns out to be not factual. I'm not aware of any relevant or pertinent picture that's any better than that one. As I said, most of the stills in the video that we become aware of are really pictures of the plasma flow. I mean, they're bright lights in the sky. They're not really pictures of the orbiter.
Okay, we'll take one more from KSC before going to headquarters. KSC, go ahead.
Yeah, Dan Billow from WESH TV. Admiral Gaiman, you didn't get the second half of that question on whether you would release an image like that if you have one. But my question is, given that you have said you will release information on major finds of debris, will you tell us what you think the key pieces of debris that have been found so far are, identify them, including any that may not have been revealed yet, and say why you think they're important?
The answer to the first part of the question is yes. We will continue this open policy of releasing information and debris statistics and any significant photography or something like that just like NASA has been doing before. This is an open process, and unlike military safety accident investigations, there's no part two to this investigation. There's no privileged, unreleasable part to this. So it's all a matter of the public record. And when we get something, and we will release all this stuff on a continuous basis. And the fact that we don't have anything to hand to you today means we don't have anything that's particularly pertinent. A lot of the things I've been talking about are work products. That is, the timeline, for example, is what Ron Dittemore released last week in cartoon form was, they quickly rushed and put one together quickly so you could understand that. Now they're doing very, very detailed analysis. They're trying to combine different sensors. They're trying to make a timeline that has different inputs. So as that becomes available, we'll release them. So work products can only be released, as the work goes on. If there are other photographs that we have, we'll release all those things. So I hope that answers your question. The second part of your question, again, I'm not going to comment on any particular piece of evidence or any particular piece of debris which is more interesting to us than another one. The priorities that were announced early in this investigation, obviously the first thing was the human remains priorities, and then anything that seems to have a data recorder in it or has any information in it, tiles, wing sections, those are all still the priorities, and they hopefully will lead to the most useful conclusions. But our experience up here, almost every one of us has had an experience where following the hottest lead and working on the